Hello, and this is the last video in this first project, and our goal is to display random code from the list. So in the previous videos we were able to assemble some codes, put it in a file for our app, load it into the app when the view loads, and display a single code, one that we selected. We call it in the software world hard-coded. We hard-coded the index, whether it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever we wanted. So now, instead of hard-coding the index, we would like to make the app randomly choose one. So how can we do that? So that is our iteration number 4. So we'll go and apply the steps. I'm just moving to a new page here. So we'll say that this is iteration number 4, and the goal is to display random code. And again, we have 3 steps. Step number 1, let's say step 1, problem formulation. And here we want to select a random index from the list of codes. So we have a list of code that had a certain number. Currently it is 5 items. So you can say, well, I need to select random between 0 and 4. Well, but remember, you can add more in that file. So you don't want to stay with 5. You want to say, I want to select from how many they are. So we need to find a way to figure out how many they are in the file and randomize that. Not the fact that it is 5 now, because we can add more. So that's our step 1. Step 2, the solution formulation. And in the solution formulation, we have we follow the model view controller pattern or MVC. So on the model, we don't have any new models for the code because we developed that in previous iteration. If there's any corrections based on the testing we've done so far, you can go back and review. We need here to represent a random number. So we need some way to represent a number. We introduced before the string type for the string, so I want to introduce the type int, which stands for integer. And integer represent a non-decimal number. So there's no decimal point. And again, by represent, I mean it knows how to go to memory and allocate enough space in the device memory to hold that data that you want. So it's like a manufacturer. It manufactures a space enough for a non-decimal number. Because non-decimal number, you'll say, well, non-decimal number can really be very small or can be very big. There are variations of int. So depending on the capacity of your device, some devices what are called 32, 64. So there are some variations of the int to give you different variations. And you will see we might need to play with it a little bit. So here, for now, this is the int, which will represent the number. And then we have the, that's all for the model. We don't need anything else for the model. For the view, we don't have to do anything for the view. The view is already done, and it has the label and everything, so no change to the view. If you want to make a change, you can go back and make change. Then the last one is the controller, and that's really where the work will be, because that's the brain or the intelligence for the app. So here we need to find a way to create a random index between 0, because we know 0. We know that we have a list that starts from 0, and the list goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Currently there are 4, but if you add more in the file, this array loads whatever in the file. It will load all of them. So we really need to build it that we don't know how many they are. So we need in the controller first is to figure out how many items in the array collection or in the list of code. Then we need to randomize, get a random number between, like it need to be between the beginning, this is the beginning index, so it goes from 0 all the way to how many they are. So I'm gonna call it to the count, to how many they are. Once you get a random number, that becomes the index that you provide here. That becomes that index. So then use the random number as the index for the object at index function. So that's all what we need. What we need is to replace that number 4 with a number that's between 0 and how many the items are. So how are we going to do this? How are we gonna get how many items? How are we gonna get a random number? And I'm glad you ask. Every time you say how, replace it with, is there a library that can do that for me? Is there a library or a library module that can give me how many items in the list? I already have the list, so we ask the list, is there a module in the list that can give me how many items in the list? And you will learn and read through the library documentation, and you will find that yes, there is one. Maybe we can do that together. If you come to Xcode, go to help and go to documentation. We are using this library NSArray, so let's go to the documentation and type NSArray and see if there is a module in this library that can give us how many they are. So here is NSArray, and the documentation is very powerful. I love coming back to this documentation, and you need to. In the beginning, it tells you a little bit about the library name, so this is the library name, and that's where, if it's based on another library, that's what it's based on. And this, when did it start, and this information you will learn about it later. Some description and some more description here, and if you scroll down there are different information, but it's organized on the left. It gives you a reference to the library and the tasks that you can do. So you can create one, and these are the different ways to create one, and one of them was content of file. Remember, we used this one. And you can ask the array something. One of the things to ask, you can ask it if it has an object. You can ask it to give you object, give you the first one, the last one, or one at a specific index, or you can also ask it what count. Let's click on count. And when you double click on count, it switches this array, and it says there's an count is a property, so it's data. It represents the number of objects in the array, and that's exactly what we want. If you're using Swift, that's how it is defined. What we really need from this is this one here. Oops, is the int. That it is defined as an int, and it is read only, so you can change it. That's why it has here a get. So this one gives you how many they are, but it gives it to you as this type int. I want to take you to this int. Remember, I told you there are different variations of int. Here are all those variations. There's int 8, which the difference between all of them is this the range. So 8 can represent any non-decimal number between -128 and 127. Int 16, then here it is, and there are the numbers. And the U means unsigned, meaning that it doesn't have negative numbers. See, all of those without the U, they can be from negative to positive. And now with the unsigned, because there are some situations where there's not going to be negative. So when there's no negative, instead of using maximum 127 because you have to keep space for the negative, you can increase the maximum for the number you want. Alright, so these are all variations of the type int. It's very important to know what is the type used, because when we assign this to our program, when we make an assignment and assign it, we need to match the types. So then we getting the random number. There are some functions, global library functions that we can use to generate that random number. The one we will look at is called arc for random uniform. There are several of them. And as I mentioned before, some of the things in the library, I will just tell you what they are and we use them. And as you gain more experience, you will come to know them. So let's use the size to generate a random number. So if we start a new line and say we want to generate a random number, so we'll say that use the function name. It's called arc for random, and you can type it and Xcode will select it for you underscore uniform. And notice that Xcode gives you some help that tells you it needs a number and it gives you back a number. So it needs the number that represents the range, the maximum limit of the range, and it gives you back a number that represents the random number that it found. Notice the type that it needs the numbers as. It needs a number as an unsigned int32, and it gives it back to you as an unsigned int32, which means you can't give it a negative number and it will not give you a negative number. So we need to provide the size. So here is the size, but our size is of type int, but it is a non-negative number. Like we know it is a non-negative number because it's a count. So I can safely put it in here as a size. This size. But to put the size in here, the type doesn't match. The unsigned 32 is not the same as int. So I have to force this int to be an unsigned 32, which I can do because the int is, think of the int as the large box and the unsigned int is a smaller box because it doesn't have decimal. So we'll take from this to that. So I'll say unsigned int 32, here it is, and say I want to use this and take the size to convert the size. So that converts the size from the int to the unsigned 32. So now we passed on the size correctly. The arc for random underscore uniform will generate the number, random number. Then I need to assign that random number so I can take it in the array index in here. But the array index takes an int, not an unsigned int, as this method will give me. So I need to wrap this whole random number in an int. So I say whatever you come up with, I want you to put it in an int. So that converts the return, the one that's going to come back, to be an int. Then I can assign this random index. So now I have random index as an int, like what this object at index give you, and I got a random index. The last step, or not the last step, the next step is to do something exactly like that, but instead of 4, I use the random index that we generated. So get a quote item at the random index. So I say let random quote, it is a string, equal, and I'm typing exactly what we typed before, object at index, and notice the index that object index want int. That's why I had to make that conversion, because it only takes an int. So I say random index. So now I use the random index that I generated, and I returned, went to the code and I returned it. But this random index, then I need to say that I want it as a string so that it matches the type I have. Finally, in step number 6, instead of assigning the single quote to the text, I'm gonna make a change. So maybe I'll comment this out so you still have a reference to it, and say label quote.text, and this time I'm gonna say it's equal the random quote, not the single quote. All right. So let's see if this is gonna give us a different quote. Remember, we set the font to start with the 0. That's what we set earlier. So it gives us this as the first one. Let's try it again. So here is a different one. Let's try it again. And it comes back. Because we run the application every time, it can bring back the same one. And there might be some things that you can do later on as you become more comfortable. But this will conclude this first project, and we have an app that every time you open it, it will load quotes from a list and display to you a random quote from that list. Thank you, and we'll start a new project soon.